Hi, welcome to the Life Expansion After 50 podcast. Today's episode, we're talking about professional area and the cognitive biases as it relates to getting derailed from your plans and your transformation journey. Now, when it comes to the professional area, it's a major fitness area in the be, do, have transition, because after you do everything right, the professional area or business in general is the one where you can see exponential differences in results for what seems to be the same amount of time invested. Simply by the fact we can easily spend 2/3 of our waking hours at work. We want to make sure we're thinking about this in a way that serves our future self. We also see people with the same skills and opportunities, and one person is able to turn those skills into a successful career or outcome, while someone else may struggle. Of course, some of this has to do with the first 5 fitness areas, but let's assume that you have everything in order in those, and again, looking at it through a neural change lens. Now, I'll talk about some of the cognitive biases that can be at play when it comes to helping or hurting one's career, profession, or other professional aspirations. When it comes to a life you'll love living, financial resources will probably play some part, so that's some additional context for the professional area. Now, there's a repeatable process behind building high-performing teams. Once you know the fundamentals, you can do it again and again. Organizations are made up of teams, and there's a repeatable process behind building high-performing teams. Once you know the fundamentals, you can do it again and again. While that's well beyond the scope of this episode, what I talk about today is definitely on the critical path to your transformation. Before getting into the cognitive biases that are important in the professional area, I want to highlight the importance of having a strong enough purpose. It can also be thought of as having a big enough why. There's an often quoted axiom that says, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, or a similar one that says, do what you love and the money will follow. Now, I maintain these quotes are only partially correct. There are many people doing what they love only to have the rug pulled out from under them if they're working on someone else's vision, or the business landscape changes if it's their own, like in the financial crisis of 2008 or the pandemic of 2020. People who survived these would likely agree that purpose played a big part. Of course, there's a little luck involved. Now, I was fortunate to be in an industry that was not upended by the financial crisis, and I was less fortunate by being in an industry that was obliterated by the pandemic. Now, since we can't control luck, let's focus on what we can control. Having a purpose and making choices based on that purpose. If you think about a clock face laid horizontally and the direction you're traveling is 12 o'clock, the range of your passion, what you love, can be set to fall between 10 and 2. If you're doing what you love within this range of your purpose, when there are major impacts, like the previously mentioned ones, you can pivot, maybe even to something else that you love, but still within that cone of your purpose, and you maintain your momentum. That's the powerful piece about purpose. As long as you're working on your purpose, as you pivot from venture to venture, staying aligned with your purpose, you get to preserve your momentum and your energy. Now, on the contrary, imagine if your purpose is 12 o'clock, but you're doing what you love, which is in the opposite direction, say at the 7 o'clock position, and there's a major geopolitical or geoeconomic impact. It's a lot harder to pivot and maintain your momentum. You lose all of that momentum. Think of it as like your balance sheet. Now, it's difficult to stay the course. It's more difficult to stay the course if all you have going for you is that you're doing what you love. For example, let's say you love traveling and you're in a travel business. Everything's going well until the next global impact. If all that was keeping you in the business was passion, there are so many other ways to achieve that. You can make enough money working in an entire different industry and have enough money to travel enough to scratch that itch. That's just a simplistic example, but you get the point. Compare that to being in a business or venture that is aligned with your purpose, your lifelong purpose. There are so many ways to pursue that purpose, so many venues, different targets, or different target areas. When you start there, it's a lot easier to find something that you love that is still within your cone of your purpose. And I bring this up first because all the neural change work you can do, while may be effective, can be multiplied exponentially when you're working on your purpose. So as we talk about cognitive biases, if you think about them in the context of pursuing your purpose, the work to change or take charge of your life is not so daunting. Having a purpose that is strong enough to continue moving forward, even on a bad day of a bad week, can make all the difference. Now, more in the podcast title, Life Expansion After 50. Generation Xers and Boomers have a unique place. Full circle from interpersonal interaction to a world where social media and online resources are becoming populated with automated artificial intelligence. We're heading back to community being important, where you're with people and it's easy to figure out who you actually know, like, and trust. And when it comes to business, there will always be a small percentage of people who respond to ads. That's why direct response has had a 2% conversion rate for decades, well before the internet. The medium changes, but not the conversion rates. This has to do with how ads prime us and tap into our cognitive biases. As an X or a boomer, you had to navigate in the interpersonal world. You have those skills conditioned in you, and couple those skills with the fact that the online world has never been easier to step into as it is now. For the last 2 decades, virtually every major online platform has been built using a process called user experience, which has since evolved to a project management methodology. Because of this, if you know how to use YouTube, Microsoft Office, and Facebook, for example, you can quickly learn any online application, regardless of whether it's a desktop or mobile. You see, user experience builds the interface by first testing and observing where and how users naturally look for information or links when engaging in a particular task online. That's why the login button is always where you look. The unsubscribe link is always where you first look. The forgot my password link is always in the same place. These are simple examples of user experience in action, but what it means for the generations that were known for not being able to program the VCR, as the VCR clock blinked and blinked from the time we bought it to the time we replaced it with DVD players, which automatically set the clock. Now, fast forward to 2024, all the applications you need to use to do whatever it is you're doing online, you are just mere minutes from getting to a functional level of aptitude. Now, as promised, here are some cognitive biases that can potentially derail a person's professional career or journey, especially when it comes to decision making. Confirmation bias, you've heard this one before. It's the tendency to favor information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. In the professional area, it can lead to biased data interpretation, overlooking warning signs and resisting alternative perspectives that challenge the established views. We see that happening all the time in politics. Overconfidence bias, overestimating one's own abilities or the accuracy of one's beliefs. This applies to the professional area in that it can result in overestimating the success of decisions, taking on excessive risks, and neglecting thorough analysis. The anchoring bias, that's one that shows up quite a bit, relying too heavily on the first piece of information, can cause us to fixate on initial information, which then limits our creative problem solving and can hinder the exploration of alternative solutions. Combine this with commitment bias, and you can see how we get some of the situations we see out there. You land on something incorrectly, but then you stick to it. The sunk cost fallacy you've heard about before, continuing an endeavor based on investments that are already made, even if the costs outweigh the benefits. It applies to the professional areas because it can lead to persisting and failing projects, investments, or strategies, resulting in resource wastage, and no one wants to pull the plug because of what's been invested already. Outcome bias is another one. Evaluating a decision based on the outcome rather than on the quality of the decision-making process. Now, this can lead to reinforcing poor decision-making practices if a successful outcome occurs due to luck rather than skill. Decision fatigue, this is a good one, especially as we get older. It seems that the more we struggle with fighting between the conscious and the unconscious, we see that decision fatigue come up earlier. I used to think it was just running out of brain glycogen, but as I got into the neural change work, and I understand neuroplasticity occurs when you're sleeping. In other words, the synaptogenesis that happens, that occurs when you're sleeping. This is the forming of new neural pathways. Remember, the neuron doesn't change. That gets wrapped in myelin and fires stronger, faster, more accurately with use. But the synapse, the neurotransmitter between the neurons, that's what self-eliminates as it gets used for other new neural pathways that are replacing the old one. That action, that neuroplasticity, takes a lot of energy, and it's why you feel fatigued at the end of a day, especially when you're working on something creation-wise. You'll also experience it as a cognitive dissonance at the end of the day, again, in creation phase. I've learned that now, especially in creation mode, if I'm feeling like it's futile, there's no way forward, I can't come up with an answer, I know that I can recognize that cognitive dissonance, and I know all I need to do is get a good night's sleep, because that's the confusion that precedes breakthrough. By definition, every break has to be preceded by some form of confusion. Every transformation has to be preceded by some breaking through the barrier. That breaking through the barrier is where that cognitive dissonance comes from. I'm linking decision fatigue to that cognitive dissonance. Now, it may not be a 100% match, but I'm certainly seeing there's some similarities there. More to come later. A decision fatigue, prolonged decision making without breaks can result in suboptimal choices and increase susceptibility to biases. You may know to stop before that happens. Hopefully you do. Hindsight bias, believing after an event has occurred that one would have predicted or expected that outcome. And it can lead to overconfidence, overlooking the unpredictable nature of certain events, and hindering the ability to learn from mistakes. A status quo bias, preferring to keep things the way they are and avoiding change. Now, this can result in resistance to innovation, inhibiting professional growth and adaptation to evolving industry trends. I'm sure you've seen that. The availability heuristic, relying on readily available information rather than the comprehensive analysis. Now, this can lead to making decisions based on immediate but potentially incomplete information, overlooking critical data. You may have seen this in the form of reusing PowerPoint presentations or reusing code, even reusing speeches. This is not how you build a high-performing team, even if the material being used came from a stellar team. See, the first step of any solution is clearly identifying the problem. So that's what gets missed when you start with skipping the comprehensive analysis. The last one is escalation of commitment, continuing to invest resources into a project despite negative outcomes. Sort of like sunk cost fallacy in a way. Now, this can lead to persistence in unsuccessful ventures, contributing to professional setbacks, leading yourself and others, learning to become your own guru and a coach to your team so you and your organization can stay the course and bounce back quickly as stumbles and setbacks inevitably happen. These are all necessary parts of transformation, and that's the goal in the professional area. Now, I'll cover some other reliable dynamics in the organizational world. They're not cognitive biases, but they're heavily associated with habits and conditioning. The first one is blue language. Now, this takes leading to the next level. I've used it for 30 years. If you've been a listener, you know conditioning leads to automaticity, and this podcast is about getting automaticity to work for us, not against us. There's no better way to do that as a leader than to learn to condition the desired behaviors so they happen without you, and to discourage the unwanted behaviors at the nervous system level, so again, it happens without you being involved. Approaching leadership in this way allows you to layer on capabilities, behaviors, and habits of thought that serve the organization and customers. Now, I'll preface this by saying I'm against manipulation and I'm against self-serving approaches to leading others. Leadership is about building a better tomorrow by working for the greater good. To explain the methodology, I'll first describe it as something that you're probably familiar with. I've seen this over and over again in observing other leaders. One leader says he or she wants some version of one or all of the following statements. They want empowered people. They want their people to voice their point of view. They want them to take calculated risks. They want bad news early. You've probably heard some of these before. Then when you talk to the team members, they say the opposite is true, the complete opposite. If you observe these leaders and you observe what's going on in action, now their words may line up with what they're saying they want. Even in private conversations, you can tell that they're sincere about wanting it. But when an employee or contractor or team member brings them bad news early, for example, or reports that they took a risk and made a mistake, even though that's precisely what the leader wants, their facial reaction can be so strong and so visceral, the team member codes that experience in their nervous system as something to avoid at all costs. Now, you may say, how could that be? I've told them over and over that this is what I want. Well, conditioning happens by one or a combination of four things: intensity, duration, repetition, and I throw in context or meaning. So even though they heard you say 50 times, your physiology told them everything they need to know. To understand this a little bit better, consider how conditioning gets fairly well locked in from 0 to 7. Not so you can be a successful business person. Our brain is over 2 million years old. So the purpose of the 0 to 7 conditioning download is so we can learn to gather, hunt, and get along in the tribe and survive long enough to procreate. Which includes don't piss off the chief because it's a good way to get killed. Is it any wonder your employees have that response? Now let's talk about two chemicals that are important when talking about habit formation and habit replacement. Dopamine is like the addictive chemical. When we engage in the right behaviors, we get a nice hit of dopamine, and we're then conditioned to repeat that. This is why, as a hunter-gatherer, ancestors would risk getting eaten by the tiger on the proverbial Serengeti, because when they return from the hunt with food for their family, they get the dopamine hit. Serotonin is like the avoid chemical. Although you get a release that's tied to good behaviors, the reaction to and feelings that you get when you miss the mark are greater. In other words, what you should not do can be as strongly conditioned by the drop in serotonin as the behaviors that you should do can be encouraged by the hit of dopamine. And there's volumes written on this subject, and it's changing as we speak as the quantum mechanics perspective makes its way through everything we thought we knew about biology and psychology. But for the sake of this episode, that's a good way to think about it. Now, what's this leadership methodology I'm talking about that helps you with building high-performing teams? I call it red, white, and blue language. So taken in order, the red language is mostly adjectives. It's describing the experience, the feeling that you might get, what you think about that person. So, and all of these could be good or bad, by the way. So I want to pay attention to the difference between the red, the white, and the blue and that meaning. Red language would be adjectives. So if I say, wow, you're really motivated, you do a great job. Or I might say, that person is lazy, or that person is distracted, or that person is energetic, that person is nervous, that person is aggressive, that person is too passive. These are all adjectives describing a sort of a behavior, but you'll see the distinction when I get into blue language. The reason why red language is to be avoided is because the good statements, the release of dopamine, the negative statements, the hit on the serotonin, get attached to the leader or the person speaking. So if I said, wow, you did a good job today, there's no meaning to that. I don't have anything to know what to do better next time. It just tells me it was a good day. And it's attached to the leader. So if the leader's gone, I may just be sitting there on my phone, right? But if the leader's around, I'm going to be doing something busy that my mind connected to the meaning of that, something connected to the statement, you did a good job today. The next one is white language. White language is describing what's not there. I call it the nothingness language. In other words, that person is never on time, or that person is not a team player. That person is not assertive. That person doesn't work hard. That person is never late. See, they could be good or bad. That person is never late. That person never has conflict. That person doesn't get along. Whatever it is, I'm describing what they're not doing. Now, here's the problem with that. There's a billion things any of us are not doing. I mean, just start listing it, right? You can start from outer space. You're not on Mars. You're not, you know what I'm saying? I can get crazy with it, but you can describe hundreds and hundreds of things that we're not doing. And like I said, there's billions of things we're not doing. So describing what's not there doesn't give any information, and it barely has the benefit. But what happens, it's usually associated with relationships that are breaking down. White language that has to do with trying to give a compliment, it doesn't really change anything. But the white language that is trying to describe something that's negative, you're never on time, the person immediately thinks about all the times that they've been on time. You're not a team player, the person instantly thinks about all the times that they've stayed late or come in early to help out the team. So white language creates, inevitably, it's either a symptom that the relationship is breaking down, or it can create some breakdown. And then the last one is blue language. The blue language is the important one. The blue language is describing observable behavior. Now, this one is really powerful because the dopamine hit gets attached to the behavior. And in the case of stating a negative, the serotonin hit gets attached to the behavior. So we're taking the leader out of it. This is why I say you can do this conditioning and have it work even when the leader's not there. Now, let's have some examples. I like the way you picked up on the subtle cues when the person was describing what was going on and you had the insight to ask more questions. See, it takes a lot more words to say it, right? It's not just saying, hey, you're a really good communicator. Because what you're doing is you're describing the behavior that you want to see more of. Now, you have to do some thinking about this because you want to know what behaviors you want on your team and what behaviors you don't want, and then catch them doing something right. On the negative side, it might be saying, I noticed that you sent that last communication out without having a second team proofread it. And you know the impact of that, this goes out to thousands of people within days. And now it makes the organization look a little bit less professional. So we want to make sure we're getting those proofreads done. Again, there's a serotonin hit. Think about serotonin as the one-upman chemical. So when you've been one-upped, or when somebody points out the shortcoming, the serotonin takes a hit. When you feel good about what's going on, the serotonin gets a little boost. But again, I'll argue that the dopamine is a stronger conditioner of behavior. So blue language makes it connect to the behavior. And this is why you can layer it on and layer it on and layer it on, because now when you're not around as the leader, the people are doing what they're supposed to do. Just like the hunter and gatherer still went out and faced the tiger to get the food, your people will face the obstacles that they need to get the job done, because you're starting to condition this. And once you get one layer in, you can build in the next and build in the next. The other thing I like to talk about with blue language is that you don't want to have what Ken Blanchard, author of 1 Minute Manager, he talked about the leave alone zap method. You don't say anything, and then there was a negative thing happen and you bring it up to the attention. Most trainers, consultants will tell you that you want to have a ratio of about 3 to 1, 3 positive comments for every 1 reprimand. So the way to use this blue language, you have your behaviors that you want to condition, and you regularly give comments with blue language, compliments with blue language, positives. And so if you're doing this throughout your team and you're doing 15 to 20 of these a week, and you're covering 2 to 3 per week, which is quite a bit, by the way, and think about it, you probably don't have negative statements every single week. I hope you don't. But if you do, that you can see how the 3 to 1 starts to fit in. Just by giving these positive comments. And now, of course, I'm talking about 15 or 20, I'm talking about across the whole team. But you do want to get into the habit, especially in the beginning as you're forming the team. Once you've done it for a while, you're not going to have that many negative comments to make. So it's not going to be so arduous to get the 3 to 1 ratio. I want to leave it there, and there's still more to cover with respect to high performing teams. So next episode, I'll pick up where I left off, do a quick recap of the red, white, and blue language, but then also talk about some other dynamics that relate directly to high performing teams. Meanwhile, I have a Facebook group that supports leaders and entrepreneurs and comes at it from a neurochange perspective. So essentially what I'm doing is unpacking all the success literature, success principles, best practices, and I'm connecting them through a neurochange lens, because that makes it actionable and it puts it within our reach. Now, to find out more about this, as well as live events where I'll be doing live Q&As, and that helps me figure out what to put in future episodes, you can go out to 7fitnessareas.com/connect, and that'll take you to a page where, like I said, you'll see the information about the Facebook group. I have another Facebook page out there, 7 Fitness Areas, as well as the upgrade version for the podcast and my 7 Fitness Areas online. So all that's going to be on that Connect page. You'll see the live events and how you can register for those. I'll see you next time. We'll pick up where we left off in the professional area.